Working on a black tank valve has definitely got to be my least favorite thing to do on an RV, but somebody has to show you guys how to do it. In this situation, what we have is a black tank valve that is leaking past even when closed. The valve is either damaged or there's something blocking it. Either way, we're going to replace the valve, and that's what we're going to be showing you how to do today. Now, luckily for these folks, they do have this additional valve at the base of their termination valve, and you can see that valve is actually stopping everything that has leaked past from coming out. So when I go to remove this cap to drain the tank, I'm not actually going to have all of that flushing out of here because this valve is stopping it. This is a great accessory to add onto any RV to prevent anything that makes it past the valve, or even after dumping, there are things that will stay in the pipes, especially if you have a long run, and then as you travel, it will make its way down here, and when you go to dump the next time and remove this cap, you're going to get poop all over your shoes. So this isn't a bad idea to invest in one of these. And guys, before we even begin, let's not forget to mention PPE. Please wear gloves. If you feel you need to, wear a face mask, because you're dealing with human waste. Even if it's your RV that you're working on, it's still not great to get human waste on or in your face, on your hands, or anything like that. Make sure you're washing up after. I'm going to try and show you the cleanest way to do this without getting yourself all messy, which brings us to our very first step, which is going to be getting some water down here into the black tank with some tank blaster to try and get out any remnants that might be in the tank. And I'm going to do a good long flush. Now, I'm sure you're wondering why I'm not just doing a standard tank flush with the tank flush inlet that's on the RV, and that's because I'm actually going to fill the tank about 3/4 with the tank blaster and deodorizer, let that sit for a little while, and then I'm going to go drain the tank. Afterwards, then I will flush it so I can try and, again, get any remnants out, because the last thing you want after you get that valve out is one last little piece falling and landing on your cheek or something like that. Trust me, I've been through it all. It's not fun. I'm trying to save you guys from that nightmare. So first things first, we're going to throw some tank blaster down there. Again, I'm not trying to shout a brand out or anything like that. This is the Thetford tank blaster, which I find to work pretty well, and it has a lot of deodorants in it. When using powdered products, I always pour the powdered product first and then follow it by water to hopefully try and mix it a little bit as it goes down. And then the next step, again, is just getting water in the tank. Again, the first step, what we're going to be doing is getting everything out of the tank and flushing the tank, trying to sanitize the tank just a little bit and get as much of the nasty stuff out of there before we begin working on the valve. That way none of it's dripping all over us. Probably still going to have some dripping, but I'd rather it be cleaner water than looking like that. So now we're at the dump station. I'm going to connect the hose and flush the tank. Now, even if you have this valve and you have a bunch of stuff sitting inside here, be very careful when you take that cap off. Ooh, I got lucky.
Poopies.
Poopies.
No more poopies. Back to the chocolate.
Now that we have nothing else flowing, we're going to hook up to the black tank flush and flush out any remaining debris that we can. Alright, now that we have our hose hooked up to the black tank flush, water is on. And you can see we have a nice steady flow of, thankfully, pretty clean water. Just a few chunks, if you will, flowing by from time to time. Here's just a quick statement about black tank flushes. I get asked about this often. When flushing the tank, do you leave the valve open or closed? Well, you can close your valve, whether it be this one or the main one, and allow the tank to fill up a little bit and then flush it back down so you get a nice rush of water. But you want to keep in mind that you can overfill your black tank. What I mean by that is you can actually fill your tank so much that it won't come out of your toilet. It will bypass the toilet. It will go all the way up the roof vent stack and create a poop volcano on your roof, if you will. So if you are using your black tank flush and you do want to close your valve, don't walk away from it. Don't let it sit too long, because it will eventually overfill the tank and cause you a lot of problems. Really gross problems too. But when done correctly, again, you can fill the tank about halfway, 2/3, maybe almost full, and then pull that valve again and get a nice rush of water to help clear any debris. All right, and after a very extended flush, to make sure I had everything out. I have nothing but crystal clear water running through that tank and out the valve. So I'll shut this off, let it drip completely out, and get every bit of water out of there and get her in, get the underbelly open, and get that valve changed out. All right, so now our tank is completely empty, hopefully, and we can get to the part of actually replacing the valve. Now, you may have somewhat easy access. You may get really lucky and the valve is actually kind of outside the underbelly, but that's a pretty rare instance. You're going to want to locate where it's at. The last thing you want to do is drop this entire underbelly. I promise you, you don't want to do that. Now, I've gotten lucky because clearly somebody has been in here before near the black tank valve. Not sure if it went bad or what, but I've already got access cut into the underbelly. Now, the way it'll be done a lot of times, again, versus removing the entire underbelly, is cutting an access panel near the valve. You may have to lower a portion of the underbelly so you can peek in there and see where the valve's at, locate it, and then you'll want to cut a 3-sided flap, making sure that the door closes towards the rear of the coach, and then you'll want to use some kind of underbelly tape, which is some super sticky stuff. You just want to make sure you clean the surface really well before you stick it so it actually sticks, unlike whoever did this. Alright, so I've got the underbelly opened up here, and as you can see, I have perfect access to the black tank valve now. This one's not super terrible. Sometimes you'll have some where the two pipes are coming together and you're going to have to use a lot of force to try and get those apart to get the new valve in and the old one out. This one is pretty much right on the tank, which I'm okay with. This one shouldn't be too bad to get to. Now, looking a little closer here at the valve, you'll see you'll have 4 bolts going through, 7/16 on both sides on this particular valve. This is a Bristol. Valterra is actually the same thing. Those are the 2 brands of valves that you'll find, is Bristol and Valterra. Kind of find an equal amount of both of them. So I'm going to go ahead and get these out. I won't bore you with watching me do that. So let's pull these 4 bolts out and I'll get her open and we can go from there. I do want to note that while I'm taking these out, this is definitely the part where you're going to want to be kind of working off to the side. I know that might be kind of difficult because you're working directly on it, but as you pull this apart and start getting these loosened up is where you're going to find if there's still any more remaining solids or liquids in there, and you don't want them to drip on you. I should actually already have gloves on, so after I take this one out, I'm actually gonna go grab my gloves before I get any of the nasties on me. All right, so now it's time for the, I guess, really fun part of separating this valve. Oh, and there we go. I don't know if you can see that little drip coming out of there. Turn the brightness on the light up a little bit. Yeah, don't sit underneath these. I try and teach you guys from experience. Even though we flushed this tank, there's still going to be some remnants in there, and no matter how much you flush it, it's still pretty gross. That's separated. Now, perfect. I already spotted some debris stuck in the valve, which may have been our initial issue. Maybe. Oh no, I guess not. That's great. So from here, I'm actually gonna let this sit for a while, and that's just gonna drain down into the shop drain because I'm not gonna sit and work underneath it while it's like that. I recommend you do the same thing and try and keep yourself clean. On the new valve, you'll notice when you open it that you're gonna have the flanges that are typically glued onto the pipes that are down there. You're not going to need those because you're not replacing them, so you'll have to take the 4 bolts out of here as well. Once you've got the 4 bolts out, be real careful not to lose your seals. To be honest with you, on a lot of these, plumber's grease is going to be your best friend. If you get a little plumber's grease on these seals, it can, oh, there we go, we had one pop out. If you get a little plumber's grease on there and pop it back in and then get a little smeared on the outside, it'll definitely help getting this to fit in. Now again, down there I have a pretty easy situation of popping this back in. Sometimes depending on how they're glued. These may be so close to each other and you're trying to spread them apart and get the valve in there. It can be a real pain, and you got to be really patient with it so that you don't damage this gasket here. So next we're going to work on getting the handles, or the pull handle, changed out. Again, this is something that this may not be bad, but you're already in it to win it. You're down there at the valve, replace the cable. It comes with the new valve. You could just disconnect the cable from the new valve and swap out just the valve, but again, you're already here, replace it. So the way that I like to do it, now this one's nice because I had a simple little access panel, is you got to remove this nut and get it pulled through here. And what I'll do is I'll actually cut the end of the cable off the valve so that I can just use this as a fish tape to pull the cable up through here, because back in there, see if I can get a little bit of light. How did my light die? Oh, great. But back here, there is quite a bit of stuff that you're going to be trying to fish around, and it's much easier to be able to pull it up with this cable. So down here, back at the original valve, we're again going to cut that cable. My mini bolt cutters will fit around it. So snip that, and then I'm going to take my new cable, or the end of that, and I'm going to tape it to that cable so that I can use it as a fish tape. Alright, so now we're ready to pull that up through the existing hole we have up there. Again, we're going to pull that through, and look at that. We have our new cable fished up through the underbelly and around all those obstructions without a bunch of headache. Alright, so we've got the backer nut and the lock washer on there. Then we're going to feed it back through this plate. Again, you may not have this plate, you may actually have to access the back of here, depending on exactly what your setup is. So we'll get all this tightened up. Alright, make sure you get that snugged up. You don't want it coming loose, bouncing down the road. And then I'm gonna have to get this back in here. One more important thing to note: when running your cables, even though we fished it, you want to make sure you don't have any really tight bends where this cable is going to have a hard time moving in and out of the outer sleeve. So just keep in mind how hard you're pulling and what you're pulling around to make sure you don't get any kinks in your cable. So we'll get this last screw in here, and then we have the pull handle to put on, which is simple. That's just one screw. So you'll put the new handle on. If for some reason you didn't get one, I've actually gotten some of these valves that didn't come with a new kit. You can most definitely just use the old one. Now keep in mind, when you go to tighten that screw, it's going to try and turn this inside rod. Don't try and get a pair of pliers on here and squeeze real hard. You may actually end up just damaging the outside. Getting this super tight is not important. It's not worth spinning that cable and messing anything up. So snug it up, you should be just fine. If it ever comes loose again, you can always just tighten it here. All right, well, we're back down here in my absolute favorite place in the world. Here's our new valve. I have the seals pulled out. And again, we talked about the plumber's grease. So I'm actually just gonna add a little bit of plumber's grease on there. And then I'm gonna kind of work it around the outside. You don't wanna use like too much of this stuff, but it's also not really gonna hurt you if you do. So we're going to take our seal, make sure it's oriented properly. You're going to kind of want that flange to sit on the inside. And again, that plumber's grease is going to help it kind of stick in there, maybe give it a little twist, and it'll be good. And then I even do the same thing after the seal is in. I'll throw a little plumber's grease on there and do the same thing, swirl it around, because as I'm putting it in and trying to insert it, this is going to help everything move freely, and most importantly, help so that I'm not pinching the seal or popping the seal out of place. Because the absolute worst thing in the world, besides the poop, about replacing a black tank valve is when you finish the whole job, you spend all this time, and then the first time you go to fill the tank, you find that it is still leaking. On that note, when putting this new seal in, I'm trying to make sure I get a good amount of light on here, you want to make sure that there's no dirt, debris, or anything. The smallest piece of debris on that seal can create a gap big enough for a leak. So make sure that that's completely clean and you don't have any debris on there. So we'll get that lubed up, and that is ready to install. Now this part is really important because, again, if you're not seated in the seal properly, you're going to go to fill your tank and you're going to end up having a leak and have to redo all this over again. So the real trick is making sure you get the two flanges separated far enough that you can get this in there without having to try and force it in there. So in other words, you should be able to pick it straight up in between there, set it onto the one flange, and then allow the other flange to smoothly engage with it. And again, watch out for water, because as you can see, you're going to have remnants dripping out and you don't want that nasty stuff getting on you. So I'm going to spend a few minutes making sure that this is all seated properly, everything feels smooth. A lot of times I'll do a little turn check, and it should turn and move nice and freely and spin if it's on there properly. But again, spend your time here. Do not make the mistake of just slapping this valve in, forcing it in, just to find out that it leaks the very first time you use it, and you got to pull all this back apart again and start from the beginning. Now that I'm confident that my seals are set properly and everything is in the right place, I am going to get my bolts through, and then for now I'm just going to get them all finger tight. And then of course, once you have everything finger tight, you're going to want to start tightening it all up. Which brings me to my next point, is that you're going to want to do all that evenly. You don't want to just go cranking this one down and then this one and that one. You might start creating some unevenness with those seals. Again, you don't want to leak. So I will snug them up evenly and go around, tighten this one, tighten that one a little bit. It's a little bit of a pain, but again, spend that extra time so that you're not redoing all this again when you find out you have a slight leak after you install the new valve. All right, this is my third time around tightening these up little by little until they're all nice and tight. Again, just try and do this as even as possible. You also don't need to over tighten this. If you over tighten it, you might actually just create more headache for yourself. So that valve is installed, that valve is in. So we're going to do a little pull test to make sure it's operating nice and smooth. If you feel any hang-ups, it is likely because your seal is pinched somewhere in that blade valve, and you're going to want to check all that again before you start using it and closing up this underbelly. That's real simple. We're just going to open and close it. Everything feels really smooth on this valve right here. So I don't think I have any obstructions or anything. So we're going to close it, and the very next thing is we're going to flood test this tank, fill it with water, and make sure it's not leaking. I won't bore you with the content of filling this with water, but let's see if it leaks. Now while we're waiting for that to flood test, I like to let it sit for about 10 minutes before I put everything back together. So far we have no leaks, but let's take a look at the original valve and go over what my suspicion is on what happened. Now we have a little debris in the seal there, some dry toilet paper. That's expected. That probably wasn't causing any leak. So this side looks pretty good. We come over here, and I'm sure the camera's not going to do it justice, but you can see the seal was jammed in here this way and is not seated in there properly. It's all jammed up in there. Let's see if we can get it out here without making a mess. And you can see that it is clearly deformed and having issues, and it was leaking past it for quite some time. And a couple things can cause this. One, you can have debris in the valve and you're sitting there trying to jam that blade valve closed through the handle because it won't shut, and it can damage the seal. But judging by the rip I have in the seal here, my guess on this one was maybe they tried to rot it out, shoved a stick down there, and that can actually just cause problems as well, because that rotor or stick will go past the valve and just tear these seals. So you need to be really careful about things like that, as well as flushing any kind of debris, or especially wipes down, because the wipes will get stuck in the valve, and then as you're trying to jam that blade valve closed, you'll just be sitting there damaging that seal. But now that we're traveling back down here into the danger zone, we can see that we have no leaks, which is absolutely fantastic. So I'm gonna get this underbelly all buttoned up. Not gonna bore you guys with that because your RV may be different and how you're accessing the valve. All of them are gonna be different. The main part of this video was discussing this valve here. One more thing I'd like to mention while we're down here though is all of these things we've been working around while we're installing this new valve. For instance, you look up here just to the top right of the valve and we have our sensor pack for our tank sensors. And those are going into my favorite thing, which is a Wago. Now, if you're not careful while you're working in this area, you could actually pull a wire out of one of these connectors and now you have a whole new problem that you need to diagnose and get back down here. So I usually like to take a little look around on my work area, around all this wiring, and make sure that nothing got pulled out of any connectors and everything is back where it should before I close this underbelly up. So as you can see, a black tank or a gray tank valve replacement isn't that difficult. It's just more tedious than anything, and let's be honest, a little bit gross. And a few things to keep in mind before you start this project too, at least one of the major ones, is what brand of valve you use. Now if you look at your pull handle on your RV, you'll see either Bristol or Valterra written across the front of it, and that's the valve you're going to need. All black tanks are going to be a 3-inch valve. Some really rare cases with a macerator on like a B van it might not be, and most gray tanks are going to be an 1.5-inch valve. Some of them are 3-inch though, so just because it's a gray tank doesn't mean it's going to be an 1.5-inch valve. So you may actually have to get a view inside your underbelly, again pull down a couple screws and get one of the sides down and see if you can gain access to it and game plan it and figure out what size valve you need and what brand of valve that you need. Now even when switching or going over to the electric valves, it's going to be the same thing. They're going to be made by two major companies, either Valterra or Bristol. There's a few one-offs out there, I'll be honest, but these are the two you're worried about. You're going to want to look into what brand and what size that you need. And then having a good view of everything beforehand might actually help you, because you may find that it's not actually your valve. You may visibly see the leak somewhere else, or some other type of damage. You may see a kinked cable, which can cause a lot of issues, or you may see a cable that came completely disconnected, and you might get lucky and just have to change the cable. But again, like I've stated several times throughout this video, if you're already down there and you already got things apart or even remotely apart, change that valve out. They don't have a huge life expectancy, so while you're already down there and in it to win it, get that valve changed out, get the cable changed at the same time, and eliminate any future headaches, at least for a period of time. For those of you who have stuck throughout this entire video, I appreciate it. I hope I helped some of you guys make your job a little easier, and even if you're a newer tech watching this video, I hope this helps you out a little bit. If you guys are interested in seeing more tips, tricks, and even some tours and RVs, make sure you guys are pressing that follow button.